Hello, I'm Adam King. I'm the Communications Manager at England's Economic Heartland, and I'm joined by EH's Decarbonisation Manager, James Gordon-Graham, for a special COP26 video Q&A session. Hi, James.
Hi, Adam. Nice to see you.
Before we launch into some quick fire questions, James, I thought I'd just ask, how did you become Decarbonisation Manager?
It's a good question. I've been lucky enough to have a number of different careers, but I think probably 14, 15 years ago, I started to think a little bit more about carbon in the environment. Oddly enough, I was working the Alps at that point, and I could see firsthand how the climate was changing and what that was doing to the environment. So I went back to school. I completed an MSc in Energy and Sustainability in 2010, and after a number of different roles, focusing on energy and carbon in built environment, in terms of the environment itself, I started working for Oxfordshire County Council. There, I focused on the application of innovation to different areas of delivery for the local authority, and from there I was seconded over to EH, where decarbonisation has really become my key and main focus.
Okay, so we're going to ask some quick fire questions to understand the state of decarbonisation in the EH region. So first off, what's the situation with transport emissions in the Heartland?
Well, we could and should be doing better. If we look back to 2005 and take an average over those last 15 years, we've fairly consistently seen emissions from surface transport around 30% higher than the UK average across our region. There's been almost no reduction in emissions from transport. Despite our cars, vans and lorries becoming much, much more efficient, they've also got bigger and heavier at the same time. We're not unusual in that respect. The pattern is very much the same across the rest of the UK.
Why do you think that is then? Why are emissions higher on average in the Heartland?
Well, the EH region is predominantly rural and peri-urban in terms of its makeup. We've got some large towns and cities, but our population is quite dispersed. Our east-west connectivity is not great, and our public transport networks between our key places hasn't been particularly well funded. If we add these things together, and many people don't actually have much of an option other than to get into their car for pretty much every trip they need to make. There's no reasonable alternative choice for them to make. We're quite a wealthy region on the whole. And that means that many of our households do actually have access to two or more cars. And once that investment in a car has been made, it's really difficult for people not to simply jump in their car. It's so convenient for them to do so, particularly when there isn't a good quality, low-cost alternative.
So we've seen political leaders on the global stage at COP26 this week, but what role is there for regions in tackling transport decarbonisation?
I think it's we've got an important role to play. It's perhaps a simplistic view, but people make places, places make regions, and regions make countries. EEH and the subnational transport bodies are really well placed to support that agenda, because as regional bodies we recognise the differences in our places and the value in that difference. It needs to be celebrated and championed. And we can work with government to facilitate this place-based approach to decarbonisation, which accommodates those differences and makes sure that the best outcomes are achieved. We have to change the way we do a lot of things to achieve net zero, but we shouldn't fear that. In our transport strategy, we'd highlight the opportunities that this brings to make some really positive changes, making our places better, cleaner and more livable, and creating lots of interesting and exciting new opportunities for businesses.
Okay, so give us a flavour of the work that EH is doing to reach net zero.
Okay, I mean, for me, I don't, before you can fix a problem, you've got to really understand what it is. And in transport terms, we're in the process of delivering a carbon baseline. And that means understanding where emissions are occurring, where journeys are starting and finishing, and what sort of reductions we'll need to deliver in each part of our region to meet the legally binding net zero targets. Once we understand that, the next part of the puzzle will be to develop an understanding of the sorts of interventions that we need to make to deliver the decarbonisation. It's actually quite a positive process. From my perspective, many of the things that we need to do to cut carbon will, as I've said earlier on, actually really improve our places. We'll end up with better air quality, more local access to jobs, shops, schools, services, not to mention better quality and more reliable public transport, better cycling and walking infrastructure.
So the government recently released the Transport Decarbonisation Plan. What are the initial thoughts on that?
I have to say, I think the team at the DFT who developed the plan should be applauded. The document should be a lens, though, I think, through which all future transport investment should be viewed. If future investment into this transport infrastructure can't be shown to be supporting the document's aims, i.e. decarbonisation, then the investment needs to be rethought. There's some really exciting policies in there. The 2030 ICE phase out, the commitment to rolling rail electrification, and the engagement with industry on HGV are all really very, very commendable approaches. I was really pleased to see the DFT are asking to see ambition from local authorities and get that enshrined in their LTP local policies. What I found a little bit concerning was there's very much a big reliance on technology, and some of which doesn't even really exist yet. Indeed, that focus on technology is strong throughout the document. There's a bit of a lack of focus on people, I think, and certainly not very much mentioned around behaviour. The theme often seems to be slightly contradictory, which is kind of do the same as you are now, just differently, without any real focus on simply just maybe doing a bit less.
And so that's, as you say, the Transport Decarbonisation Plan focuses a fair bit on those kind of technologies that we all know that we need, but there's also a big role, you would say, in terms of changing behaviours as well.
Absolutely. I don't think there's no real sort of single magic bullet for addressing the challenges we face in terms of climate change, and transport decarbonisation is no different. It really it's a bit of a case of all of the above and more, and it doesn't make for a particularly exciting answer here, but unfortunately that's the reality. Technology will undoubtedly play a massive part, but we all have to change how we consume and pay for transport over the next 2 to 3 decades. Ultimately, we need to completely decarbonise the power system and make sure we've got all that additional extra capacity in terms of green power required to meet transport electrification demand. But even if we manage that, then if we continue to follow current trends in transport demand, we'd end up with significant growth in trips. Some of the DFT forecasts point to a 50% more trips happening by 2050. That's simply not an outcome that we can really countenance. So yeah, we definitely do need to be thinking quite a lot about behaviour and changing the way that we consume and all access transport.
Okay, so we've had a question on Twitter for you, which is about rail electrification. Basically, how important is rail electrification?
The Transport Decarbonisation Plan commits to a rolling programme of electrification, which I think EEH fully support. Electrification makes good economic and environmental sense in the long term. One thing is I don't quite understand is what the blocker is to be building a fully electrified east-west rail, which is something that EEH are extremely supportive of and would like to see committed to. One thing I would say, though, is that rail, even with its current traction blend of diesel and electric, is by its very nature a really low carbon solution. We need to be thinking about future rail demand and shifting more freight to rail and making sure that the UK is prepared and ready for that to happen. Okay,
so just finally, I've got probably the big question. What does a zero carbon transport system look like for our region, do you think, in the future?
I've sort of talked a little bit about this earlier on, that decarbonisation by its nature delivers a lot of additional benefits. So a cleaner, greener, safer, more inclusive transport system, plenty of active travel, lots of opportunity for people to make low carbon choices. Fundamentally, though, transport is a derived demand. We've got to start thinking about how our places work, how they're put together, how we access the things that we need to make a good life. I hope decarbonisation can play a catalytic role in delivering that. How it looks, I mean, that's the $1 million question. I hope I'm around to see it.
Great stuff. Thank you, James. And your details are on our website. So if anyone wants to get in touch with James to explore these issues any further, please do so. It's www.englandseconomicpartner.com. Thank you very much, James. Good to speak to you.
Thanks, Adam. Bye-bye.